Hey there, hi there, ho there. Welcome to Unit 4. So now we're going to be talking about something called stratigraphy as well as the Earth's age. So this is going to be our kind of first tiptoe into kind of the world of rocks and the layers of rocks near the surface of the Earth and kind of what they tell us about Earth. So now we're going to start to kind of read the rocks to tell a story. All right, so that's what it's all about. So when we're looking at rocks or layers of rocks, there's actually three different ways to date a rock, put some sort of age to it. First is something called absolute age. Absolute age is the exact numeric age of a layer of rock or fossils. So, for instance, if I were to say, my father's exact age is, my father's age, he's 65 years old. That's an absolute age, putting a number on it. You know, this rock is 2.7 million years old. I'm putting a number on it. So that's an absolute age. It can to determine this, you have to use some fancy machinery, something called radiometric dating. We'll talk a little bit more about this later on. So it is kind of advanced and expensive, so we don't do it necessarily too often. But it is there are ways to put an exact number on a rock, and that's known as the absolute age. All right. Geologic age is another way to kind of date a rock. So we scientists created a geologic timescale relating layers of Earth, called stratigraphy, and major events to describe the timing and relationships of events that have occurred during Earth's history. And so we call that geologic age. And so we can kind of chunk, ages of rocks into kind of these different blocks, these different sections. There are different sections, and again, this will be another a part of this presentation lecture on geologic age. But we can break the Earth's history going back 4.543, if you want to get technical, 4.54 billion years. We can break it down into big chunks called eons, smaller chunks called eras, even smaller chunks called periods, and even smaller chunks called epochs. A lot of what we focus on in geology is our periods. So instead of saying like my dad's 65, I can say like he's in his 60s. That's kind of what geologic age is. We're just kind of chunking it. We're putting kind of, these ages of rocks and layers of rocks and fossils into kind of these bigger chunks. Instead of saying this rock is 180 million years old, I can say this rock is from the Jurassic period. All right, so I'm kind of putting it in a chunk. I'm not putting an exact number on it, but I'm putting it in a chunk. A lot of times when we're looking at rocks and rocks with fossils, knowing when the organism, which the fossil is, lived on Earth, we can put a date on a rock real quick, right? If I find, some dinosaur bone in some sort of rock layer, then I know that rock layer is probably somewhere between the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. This is when the dinosaurs lived on Earth. All right. So again, these are just kind of like chunks of time. Called and the way to and this dating technique is called the geologic age. And then finally, a third way to date rocks is called relative age. So if my dad is 65, that's an absolute age. My dad is in his 60s, that's kind of like a geologic age. Or my dad is older than my mom. That's relative age, relative to one thing. Something is older or younger. I am older than my sister. My sister is younger than I am. Relative to one another, something is older, something is younger. And we can do the same with rocks. So looking at the age of a rock, fossil, or other some sort of geologic feature relative to another feature. This can be done simply, once you know the rules how to do it, by just looking at the positions of rock layers and other features. So looking at this kind of outcrop, which is in Utah, just north of Moab, we see these different rock layers here. We see these faults, these breaks, and movement within these rock layers. So, once we understand the rules of relative age dating, we can just look at an outcrop like this road cut. There's a road right here. And we can look at these rocks and say, okay, this happened first, this happened next, this happened after that, then this happened, and this happened. So that's relative age. You're not putting a number to it. You're not putting a necessarily time frame to it. It's just relative to one another. This happened first, this happened last type thing. All right. So Each of these different dating techniques will be a separate section. We'll kind of go in reverse. So we'll talk about relative age, geologic age, and then absolute age. And that kind of brings us to the end. It's just a quick little intro of where we're going. So we'll pause here. When we come back, we'll talk about relative age. Again, this one is older than this one, which is younger than this one. So relative to one another, this thing's older, this thing's younger. That's what we'll talk about. And I'll see you in just a minute.